You know, after over 2 years listening to the service today, I can actually say that the silence of the sanctuary has been banished. Listening to the singing, both individual and collective singing, it really warms the heart and believes that we're moving forward in the right direction. So Yasher Koach to all of you for coming. And for those of you who are joining us online, I hope that you're singing just as hard and from the soul as is being done today here. So, if I start off with the words, B'chol dor vador omdim aleinu lechalotenu v'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. In each and every generation, someone arises up to destroy us, but the Holy One is blessed, who is blessed, who rescued us from their hands. Do you recognize those words? Because you should do. And why should you recognize those words? Because you say them every year at the Seder night. B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalosenu v'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. Words that are read every year. Yes, they're only read twice a year. And yes, you're holding a cup of wine in your hand and you're standing up. I get it. It's a little bit different than here. Today is Shabbat Zachor, Shabbat of remembrance, when we are commanded to remember an evil person from an earlier generation who tried to destroy us, namely Amalek. You heard this morning in the Torah reading by Chazon Sheni, Gershon. He read the following words. He read, how undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished, when you were weary, when you were cut down. All the stragglers in your rear were attacked. And what does the Torah tell us? Not only are we required to remember the name of Amalek and what happened, but we are required to blot out the memory of Amalek. It's a bit of a question here. How can you remember if you're supposed to block out? But that's not where I'm going to today. That's a whole different subject. We are commanded to block out the memory of Amalek. And the Torah is insistent with the words as it ends in the reading. It says, Lo tishkach, do not forget. We remember Amalek this week, always the week before Purim, because of the bad guy in the Purim story. Who was the bad guy in the Purim story? It was Haman, traditionally considered to have been a descendant of Amalek. There are legends. There are legends that say that King Shaul didn't kill the Amalekite king Agag immediately when he captured him against God's instructions. Agag, the legend tells us, managed to get some slave girl pregnant while he was held captive, and that child was the ancestor of Haman. Okay, it's a legend. Saul was not supposed to have shown the completely evil Agag, the Amalekite, any mercy. His hesitation to carry out God's instructions, whether it was out of mercy, out of a sort of professional courtesy, one king to the next, and maybe there's some sort of courtesy that goes on between them, not to kill another king, was said to have led to the continuation of this evil line. It's also possible that Haman wasn't actually even a descendant of Agag, but rather the rabbis made him a descendant of Amalek, because Amalek is seen as the personification of evil, to attack the weary, the elderly, from behind, in an indefensible position, is the ultimate evil. And despite the spin that the rabbis tried to put on the story with that midrash, that is, it's likely the truth that it was a legend and they just wanted to connect the two. There is no one genetic line that's filled with evil. There are descendants of wicked people who are very righteous. And there are descendants of very righteous people who are truly wicked. Descendant, in this case, is understood metaphorically. Metaphorically and not literally. Being a descendant of Amalek is not something that would show up in any DNA test, I can promise you that. Evil people bent on destruction are the spiritual heirs of Amalek. Hitler, Yamach Shemo v'zichro, was the Amalek of his generation. Over the past 2 weeks, Putin has shown himself to be the Amalek of our generation. No, he's not specifically targeting the Jews, although he's very clearly targeting one Jew in particular. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. What Putin is doing is even worse than just targeting the Jews. He's targeting all Ukrainians, including the hundreds of thousands of Jews living there. But the worst thing about what he's doing is he is destroying a very long peace. 80 years in which no European nation has simply attacked another European nation in a land or resources grab. He is taking the world back to a much more dangerous time, a time when dictators and autocrats did what they pleased and took what they wanted at all costs. What made Amalek especially wicked is that he attacked the weak and the vulnerable people at the end of the column that were marching to the promised land. The elderly, the women, the children, the stragglers. Putin is doing exactly the same thing. You must have all read the reports that Russian soldiers have fired on civilians trying to flee for their lives. He offered evacuation corridors to Russia, as if any Ukrainian in their right mind would want to go to Russia. There are pictures of maternity hospital that was shelled to pieces by Russian missiles, leaving women, children, and babies buried beneath the rubble. I could go on and on. Vladimir Putin seems to have seriously miscalculated. He certainly didn't expect the Ukrainians to be able to hold off his military might. And no doubt he thought that that he would be able to move so fast, like he did in Crimea, that he would be in and set before the West could even get sanctions in place. And then he'd be negotiating for a position of relative strength with the defeat of Ukraine a fait accompli. Instead, what have we seen? We've seen the resolve that he no doubt never expected, the resolve from both the Ukrainians and the West. You know, in the Purim story, the buffoon of a king, because Ahasuerus was a complete buffoon, he did not directly defend the Jews, but he gave the Jews permission to defend themselves. And in the Megillah that we're going to read on Wednesday night, we were told that whatever has been commanded by the king cannot simply be reversed. But the king gives the Jews permission to defend themselves. And it says in the Megillah, we're going to read it, we're going to hear a beautiful Megillah reading, I believe, this week, special reading, when we're told how the letters sent in the king's name. The king, it says, has permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives. And if any people or province attacks them, they may destroy, massacre, and exterminate its armed force together with women and children and plunder their possessions. That's what the Megillah says. Not that Biden or the head of any other Western nation is a king ruling over Ukraine. Don't think that for 1 second. But that in essence, that is exactly what the West has done. They've stayed out of it. And they've given permission, well, maybe not the plundering part, but they've turned a blind eye to the self-defense of the Ukrainians. NATO is not rushing to defend Ukraine with American fighter planes and tanks. But the NATO nations are enabling the Ukrainians to defend themselves by providing them with armaments, with the weapons, humanitarian aid, and much-needed moral support and financial sanctions that ratchet up the pressure on Putin. Without this support, without this permission, Ukraine would not stand even the slimmest chances that they have. The US is stepping up and providing much more than just permission. The US House of Representatives just passed a spending bill which included $13 billion in aid for Ukraine. About half of it's for humanitarian aid and the other half for military spending. And although Canada can't meet that level, Canada nonetheless has made incredible commitment as well. Canada is doing a lot to support Ukraine. The Canadian government recently joined with the UK and the Netherlands to form an international Ukraine support group that will coordinate efforts to provide assistance in Ukraine. Prime Minister Trudeau, as you know, just returned from a trip to Europe to coordinate with our partners on how best to support Ukraine. He also told the Ukraine president that Canada will be providing another shipment of military equipment. The spiritual descendants of Amalek will be with us until the coming of the Messiah, till Mashiach, the Messianic age. Shabbat Zachor, where we remember what Amalek did to our ancestors, isn't only to remind us of our history, but it is there to serve as a warning. Why are we commanded never to forget? And the reason being is so that we will never get caught off guard, so that we'll be ready to confront evil. To confront evil, the one that comes in every generation, b'chol dor vador, that rises up to destroy us. And thus, I want to conclude by offering a prayer for the people of Ukraine. Please rise. Ribbono shel olam, Master of the universe, strengthen the Ukrainian people as they face yet another Amalek. Guide the leaders of the Western nations on the proper path to support Ukraine. Protect your children, Israel, in Ukraine. Guide those who wish to find refuge in Israel or elsewhere. Guide them to safety. Protect the Ukrainian leader, Vladimir Zelensky, from all harm. And we beg you to turn the heart of Vladimir Putin from his evil ways. And may we yet see the day when nation will not lift up sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war anymore. Amen. Please be seated. At this time, we continue with the Ein Kelohenu.